to discuss accounting for manufacturing business. Before we start, it is necessary for us to define what a manufacturing business is. A manufacturing business is one that is involved in buying goods and converting these goods into finished products. So whenever we buy goods, we call the goods that we purchase as a manufacturer is called raw materials. So these raw materials are converted into finished goods by adding labor and overhead. So a perfect example of this is a bag manufacturer. So what they do is they go to Divisoria and buy cloth and other raw materials, and then they hire sewers and then incur other manufacturing costs in order to produce the bags that they will eventually sell to the final consumers. So this is the normal operating cycle of a manufacturer. Of course, we start with cash, and then we use this cash to purchase raw materials. These raw materials are put into production, so they will be included as part of the work in progress. And once these goods are finished, they will be classified as finished goods. These finished goods are the goods that are ready for sale. So eventually, we will sell this to our customers, uh, maybe on account. And if so, it will take time, or it will take a couple of days before we convert it back to cash. So it is noticeable that the normal operating cycle of a manufacturer is a little bit longer than that of a merchandiser and, of course, a service business because of the conversion process involved. So this is the, okay, I'll just adjust this. This is the conversion cycle. So basically, what we do is we purchase raw materials, and in the production center, we add labor and overhead. So of course, labor is quite self-explanatory, but as far as the overhead is concerned, we'll discuss later what costs are classified as overhead. And then after processing in the production center, we we have the finished product which we will sell to our customers. Okay, so this is how we measure profit for a for a manufacturer. So of course, we start with the first line item, which is the sales. Less sales returns and allowances, less sales discounts equals net sales. We will deduct the cost of goods sold in order to arrive at the gross profit. We'll deduct all the operating expenses to arrive at the operating income, less the interest expense, and finally less income tax expense in order to arrive at the net income. So if you will go back to the previous topic, which is accounting for merchandising business, you will notice that there is no difference on how we measure profit for a merchandiser and a manufacturer. Okay, so we start with sales and then deduct the contra sales account, and then we deduct the cost of goods sold. The main difference here is how do we arrive, or how we arrive at the figure cost of goods sold. So we'll discuss that later again. Okay, so another difference between merchandising and a manufacturing business is that a manufacturer has three inventory accounts as compared to a single inventory account of a merchandiser. So, if you can recall, we have the merchandise inventory account for the merchandiser, but for the manufacturer, we have the raw materials inventory, work in process inventory, as well as the finished goods inventory. So, basically, the raw materials inventory, this is the inventory account that we use for the goods, for the raw materials, or for the goods that we purchase which are awaiting processing. So the goods that we need in order to manufacture the products, if they are not yet used in production, they are contained, or their cost is here included as part of the raw materials inventory. Now, once these goods are put into process or are requisitioned into production, we transfer the cost of these raw materials to the work in process inventory. So here in the work in process inventory, the cost of the raw materials used um, is again transferred, and then we also add the cost of labor and overhead that we incur. Okay, and then of course finally, once the goods are finished or are ready for sale, we transfer the cost of the finished goods to the finished goods inventory account. So this is the finished goods inventory account, of course, includes the cost of the goods that are ready for sale. Okay? So for us to understand the cost components or the product cost, it is I will discuss first the cost classification and the financial statements. So basically, in the for the cost classification, we have two types. We have the expired cost and the unexpired cost. So this concept is not new to you anymore because of because of the lesson in adjusting entry that you had in the previous term in the prelim period. So when we say expired costs, these are costs found in the statement of comprehensive income. So when we say expired, usually these are already expenses. And then of course, unexpired costs are the costs that are found in the statement of financial position. The unexpired costs, basically, these are considered as our assets. Okay? So another cost classification as far as the financial statements is concerned, we have the product cost or the inventoriable cost and the period cost, which is expense outright. So for the product cost, these are the costs that we capitalize as part of our inventory. Okay? And then period cost, these are our expenses. So for the product cost, there are three types of product cost. Number one is the direct material. We also have direct labor and factory overhead. So the factory overhead includes indirect materials, indirect labor, and other manufacturing costs. So to determine, so to discuss or to define, diba, each type of product cost, let us imagine or let us picture a finished product. So for example, the finished product is a bag. Okay, so uh, in order to manufacture the bag, what do we need? Okay, so number one, you need the cloth, you need the zipper, you need the thread, and then you also need workers, okay, or laborers. So we have yung tinatawag nating trimmer, and then we have the sewer, we also have the quality control personnel, so on and so forth. And then of course, what else do you need? You need the sewing machine, uh, you need electricity. Okay, you need a space. So you need a factory space, diba? So these are the things that we need in order to produce the finished product, which is a backpack or a bag. Okay? So what is a direct material? So let us differentiate first direct material and indirect material. So sometimes there is an incorrect notion that the finished goods can be manufactured without the indirect material. Actually, that is wrong. Okay, the main difference between direct and indirect materials is that the cost of the direct materials are easily traceable, 'di ba? Its cost can easily be traced to the finished product. Okay? And then the indirect materials, of course, since it is indirect, its cost cannot be easily traceable. So what we do is we just allocate. So later on, I will give an example. So for example, let us talk about the materials that we need in order to manufacture the bag. As mentioned earlier, you need the cloth, you need the zipper, and the thread. These are the basic things that we need in order to manufacture the bag. Okay? So, if we are already computing for the cost, if we are already computing for the cost of the bag that we have manufactured, of course, what you will do is you have to know how many yards of cloth was used in order to manufacture the backpack. Okay, so paano ba yan? Yung sa direct materials, 'di ba? So, ang gagawin mo dyan, syempre, pag bumili ka ng direct materials mo or ng raw materials mo, you go to Divisoria, you purchase cloth. Nakapunta na ba kayo sa Divisoria? If you go to Divisoria, there is a street there, I think that Ilaya Street. Andun yung maraming tela, no? So, when you purchase cloth, syempre, naka-rolyo-rolyo siya. Okay? So, you purchase that, and then you know how many yards are there in that one roll of cloth and what is the cost of that roll of cloth, 'di ba? Yung isang rolyo na yun, alam mo kung magkano yung cost nun. So, if later on, during the manufacturing process, you have used 2 yards of cloth, 'di ba? If you have used 2 yards of cloth, you can easily compute. For example, one roll of cloth that you have purchased, let's say, is 10,000, and then we have 100 yards of cloth in one roll. So, 10,000 divided by 100, I think that is 100 pesos per yard. So, if you have used, let's say, 2 yards of cloth in manufacturing the bag, edi it means that the cost of the cloth is 200 pesos per bag. So, we can easily trace it to the finished product. Okay? Now, what about the next material, which is the zipper? So, how do you, paano ba binibili ang zipper? Usually, ang zipper per piece yan, no? So, you already know, bibili ka sa Divisoria, magkano po yung zipper? Sabi nila, 10 piso isa. Diba? So, if you have used, let's say, three zippers in order to manufacture the bag, and it costs 30 pesos each. Sorry, 20 ba? Sabi ko kanina. O 20 pesos each. O what will happen? O di, 3 times 20 pesos. That is 60 pesos. O di, it is very easy to trace the cost of the zipper as well as the cloth to the final product or the finished product. But what about the thread? What about the thread? So, paano ba bumibili? Paano ba binibili yung thread? 'Di ba? So, syempre, kung large scale manufacturing tayo, yung thread natin naka-cone yan. May cone siya. And then, though we know gaano kahaba yon, 'di ba? Madaling i-trace yon. So, kunwari, you purchase one cone of thread, let's say for 200 pesos, and then alam mo kung gaano siya kahaba, ilang metro siya. But it is very difficult to trace how many meters or how long yung thread, gaano kahaba yung thread na ginamit mo in order to manufacture the bag. So, it is very hard to do that. Pwede, pero time consuming. 'Di ba? So, in accounting, we know, we have the concept of cost benefit. So, if the cost of providing the information must not exceed the benefit that will derive from the information itself. So, kesa maghirap pa tayo na ititrace mo gaano ka, masyadong matrabaho yon that you will trace, no? So, what we do is that we classify the cost of the thread as an indirect material instead. 'Di ba? Kaysa direct material. So, again, pwede ba? O, balikan natin yung una kong sinabi, ha? Pag sinabing indirect material, it means, hindi ibig sabihin nun that these materials or raw materials are not necessary anymore, no? Kasi, pag tiningnan mo yung tatlong raw material na yon, kung wala kang sinulid, hindi ka makakagawa ng bag. 'Di ba? So, saan nagkakatalo? Yung traceability. How easy it is, how convenient it is to trace the cost of the material to the finished goods. Okay? So, yon. That is the difference between a direct material and indirect material. Now, what about direct labor and indirect labor? So, direct labor is the wages that we pay to the people or the laborers who work directly uh, who work directly with the finished product or the goods itself, no? So, sige, example that you imagine that you are in a factory. So, if you are in a factory, sino-sino mga nandun, 'di ba? So, you have, pagpasok mo pa lang, you have the security guards. You also have the sewers, the trimmers, 'di ba? Kasi iba-iba 'yan eh. Pag ikaw sa factory, pag ikaw nananahi ka lang, yun ang ginagawa mo. Iba yung tao na nagugupit kasi 'di ba, pag nananahi ka, merong mga patterns yan. So, ibang tao yung nagugupit, ibang tao yung nananahi. And then, syempre, aside from these people, we also have the what? Supervisors. So, aside from the supervisors, meron ka pang, let's say, janitor. Kasi syempre, may mga nagwawalis, so on and so forth. So, dito sa mga tao na to, yung sinasabi ko nga na security guard, janitor, supervisor, trimmer, and so on, sino lang ba sa kanila yung humahawak mismo dun sa bag na ginagawa? Diba? Ang humahawak lang naman talaga dun sa bag na ginagawa are the sewers and the trimmers. And therefore, their salary or their wages are considered as direct labor. Now, the salary and the wages of the supervisor, security guards, and the janitors are considered or are classified as indirect labor because although they are necessary for the manufacture of the goods, they do not work. They do not work. They do not handle the goods itself. Okay? So, for there. For the factory overhead naman, 'di ba? It includes again indirect materials which I have already explained earlier, indirect labor as well as other manufacturing costs. So, the other manufacturing costs that I am referring to here is of course number 1 is the rent for the factory space. We have the utilities, diba? Insurance of the factory space. We have the depreciation of the sewing machines used in production. So these are all considered as other manufacturing costs, part of the factory overhead. So, still in product cost, so when we add the direct materials and the direct labor, we will get the total prime cost. And then the conversion, the direct labor plus the factory overhead equals the total conversion cost. Okay? So, we call the direct materials and the direct labor as the prime cost because they are the primary items or things needed in order to manufacture the product. Whereas direct labor and overhead are called the conversion cost. Okay? So going back, of course, our period cost includes selling expenses and administrative expenses. Okay? So next we will discuss the pro forma journal entries. So whenever raw materials are purchased, the pro forma journal entry is to debit raw material inventory and to credit cash or accounts payable. Okay? Now, whenever direct materials are issued into production, the pro forma journal entry is to debit work in process inventory and to credit raw materials inventory. Of course, indirect materials may also be issued to production, so the entry is to debit factory overhead and to credit raw materials inventory. Whenever direct labor is incurred in the production, so our entry is to debit work in process inventory and to credit cash or wages payable. Whenever we incur direct labor, the entry is to debit factory overhead and to credit cash or wages payable. Now, if we incur other manufacturing costs, our entry is to debit factory overhead, credit utilities payable, credit accumulated depreciation, credit rent payable, and other appropriate accounts. So, we will review the pro forma journal entries whenever during the time that we answer problems in the next session or in the next video. Okay. So next, application of overhead to production. Our entry is to debit work in process inventory and credit factory overhead. So as you can see, in the work in process inventory account, this is the account wherein we mix together the direct material, direct labor, and of course the overhead. Okay? And then of course after we complete the manufacturing process, The pro forma entry is to debit finished goods inventory and to credit work in process inventory. Now, um, if we sell the goods, the entry is to debit cash or accounts receivable and credit sales, and another entry is needed to debit cost of goods sold and to credit finished goods inventory. So we go back again, we will emphasize on the pro forma journal entries later on. So we go back to the computation of the net income for a manufacturing business. As I have mentioned earlier, we measure profit or we compute for the net income in the same manufacturer the manufacturer and the merchandiser computes for their net income in the same manner. The only difference is how we determine the cost of goods sold. So, before we delve into that, before I discuss how to compute for the cost of goods sold, we also have the concept of cost of goods manufactured in manufacturing business. So, the cost of goods manufactured basically is the total cost of the goods that we have finished for the period. Okay, during the period. So this is a very long formula that in the beginning you need to memorize, but later on as we answer problems, um, I can tell you that if you know the journal entries, if you know the performa journal entries, there is no need for you to memorize this very long formula, but just the same, we'll discuss this. Okay, so we start with the raw materials inventory beginning plus the raw materials purchased equals the total goods available for use. And then we deduct the raw materials inventory end in order to arrive at the raw materials used. Now, what we want to do is to separate the direct materials from the indirect materials. So we will deduct the indirect materials used from the total raw materials used in order to get the direct materials used. And then we'll add the direct labor and factory overhead so that we can get the total manufacturing cost. When we add the work in process inventory beginning to the total manufacturing cost, we'll arrive at the total goods put into process, and then deduct the work in process inventory end, that is our cost of goods manufactured. Okay, so basically the work in process inventory end are the goods that we have started in process but we haven't finished at the end of the accounting period or at the end of the month. So once you know how much is the cost of goods manufactured, we can already compute for the cost of goods sold. So the cost of goods sold is computed as finished goods inventory beginning plus cost of goods manufactured equals cost of goods available for sale, and then we deduct our finished goods inventory end, and that is the cost of goods sold that will deduct from the net sales to arrive at the gross profit of a manufacturing business. So that's it. We will uh, we will emphasize some of the concepts once we answer problems in the next videos or in our next synchronous session. Thank you.